I think we had a quite productive day. It was, and yesterday we had a quite productive roundtable discussion. We revised, we could already revise Bantu grammatical reconstructions on two specific issues. The whole day of today was dedicated to the Proto-Bantu verbal form, to get the discussion started, I'll raise some of the issues I think that came up today across during the different or across the different presentations. Tom and Jeff opened the day with one long or two shorter papers on the verbal form in Bantu. Tom mainly focused on the pre-stem material, Jeff on the material following the root, and specifically the inflectional final vowels or final suffixes. And I think one of the major questions, one which has been hanging around for quite some time already, also in the chapters or articles that Tom and Larry published as a response to each other's work. To what extent, one of the major questions is to what extent the agglutinative verbal form as reconstructed by Mason or as proposed by Mason, to what extent it can be reconstructed to Proto-Bantu, and if this can be reconstructed to Proto-Bantu, to which note in the tree this corresponds. I think one of the major questions is this including Northwestern Bantu or excluding, is Northwestern Bantu an innovation, or is rather the agglutinative structure found in more canonical Bantu languages further east and further south, is that the innovation? I think that's one of the major questions. So the questions that came up in Roger's talk with data from Bantoid, one specific proposal he did is that at least the causative, the long causative suffix from reconstructed by actually not reconstructed by Mason. By Mason it was reconstructed with a question mark whether each or each should be reconstructed. It's from Bantoid evidence, it seems to be clear that it's something that goes way beyond narrow Bantu, so that it certainly could be reconstructed to Proto-Bantu. But one of the questions that came up is that there's much more variety or diversity in Bantoid, and so one of the, I think, fascinating or questions that came up is that whether we should not reconstruct more extensions or derivational suffixes to Proto-Bantu than has been done so far. So from the diversity in Bantoid, is that not rather representing retentions rather than innovations? And so is the set of extensions reconstructed for Proto-Bantu not too slow? And then we had 4 talks on specific derivational suffixes on the Proto-Bantu extensions. I think one of the important questions that came up in both Sarah and Roseanne's talks were that whether both spoke about the grammaticalization of extensions from non-verbal elements, or from verbs into bound morphology, or prepositions into verb morphology. But one of the questions is this: where do we need to situate that grammaticalization? Did this happen at the Proto-Bantu stage or way before, or repetitively through the history of Bantu history, so that's one of the important questions that came up during these talks. The talk by Sebastian and Lenya is whether the middle, or if that is a voice category that we need to take into account, or into into Bantu, whether this is something that can be reconstructed or needs to be taken into account for Bantu, reconstructing Proto-Bantu. So I think maybe with these issues we can start the discussion. Is there anyone who wants to open the discussion? Throw in.
I want to say there seemed to be a second conclusion, was that the CVN extensions go way back as well. I mean, the same things that you find in Akose, you find in Dakoid and in Lamso and so on. So I mean, that's another. I mean, the meaning is less clear than the causative, but they clearly have a long history going back.
C.
Well, then Zen and Ren and all those.
Okay, yeah. Oh, the ones where maybe yeah, okay, yeah.
Yeah, close to. I wanted to point out that what's interesting, and we certainly saw that in your talk and others, that so much of the variation and the problems or the issues that we're dealing with have to do with the on. And not just that, even the CARP template that was mentioned, when you see in different languages that there are other orders and problems, it almost always involves on. If you would take on out, it's obvious that is precedes il. That is, the is causative precedes the applicative. It's obvious that the applicative precedes the causative e. It's obvious that e precedes the passive u, if we're just talking about those languages that have that. Did I skip anything? Anyway, but on is all over, it's giving multiple orders. Even, as I said, Meusen put it before il, I put it after il as a default. And then we see it also joining ang, and we see it joining, asan and isyan, so much of the issues we have to deal with have to do with on disproportionately.
What does that suggest then, Larry?
I don't know, except what I said at the last hour, that, boy, this thing must have been around a long time, and or once it gets in there, it just wreaks havoc on the system. It just says, I don't want to be alone, or I don't want to be in that place, I want to be somewhere else. I think part of it, what I had thought originally in terms of the suffix ordering, the fact that you can get, let's say, il on and on il in some languages, or is on is, depending on the scope, that is very variation, is because the reciprocal is the it's easiest to determine what the scope is when it's see each other or hit each other for some reason, or at some place is different from do something for each other. So you can kind of see the different scopes more transparently than some of the other combinations. And so I think that's what creates some of the issues, but some of the rest of it is the ang thing is also the ag is also another thing that maybe it doesn't like to be alone either. I don't know. It likes to join on. Because when you have reciprocity or doing things together, whatever the original, the associative, obviously there's fractionality there. There's more than one participant. There may be more than one action. All that kind of stuff. So that these things just join together and become fixed orders in some cases that even could conceivably, as you showed, can violate the orders that one would have expected if you were adding them one at a time.
Is there something, do you think there's something about the form of the on that matters there? I mean, in terms of the vowel and
one of the things, certainly what I think happened in Lusoga and Luganda, what I was reporting, that you get, instead of getting, let's say, agan A in the subjunctive, you get agan A sometimes. It's optional. You know, an ile, gan, ile, although it undergoes changes, is that when you have something like bonagana, the first a could be interpreted as the final vowel, the default a. So it could be bona plus gana instead of bon ag ana. You know, like that. And then that gets generalized by analogy to bonagane becomes bone gane. You know, I think that's what happened. That's the best I can do there. I think that's what happened. So the fact that it has an a in it is playing some role. Yeah. Michael?
Yeah, isn't this also what's happened with the ang or nga, the
Oh, yeah.
imperfective? I mean,
Yeah.
I think we have some of those reanalyses.
Yeah, that's right.
Is it
Because you
one
have,
way or
in
the
Uganda,
other?
it's nga,
Right.
you know, that you add at the end for the habitual kind of thing. It's sticking outside as a clitic. But even when the ag combines with ile, there are some languages where you get agan, you get agile, and others you get ilage, or the Paltase. Like that, Yao has ilage, I think Lega has agile. You know, so even there you've got some messy stuff there.
But isn't that combined with what Dima remarked, that in those languages where you have maximality constraints, those are the two that can provide an extra syllable. If you have a maximality constraint of 2 syllables,
Yes.
ag can add one,
Yes. Yes.
and an can add another one. So you can have up to 4 in some languages, where elsewhere you have a maximality constraint of 2 syllables instead.
But what does happen is, like in Koyo in C24, 5, you can get 3 syllables maximum stem, unless you have the ag, which marks durative.
Right.
Then you can have 4.
Well,
Oh, yeah,
yeah, you
that's
see
exact-
that in
yeah.
Mahongo has the same. So
Yeah.
all these things seem to point to the fact that these are either recent additions to the verb form, or they are elements that are integrated in a cyclical way into the verb form. And so that's compatible, I think, with the hypothesis that an and preposition na are related, and that apparently for some reason na has a tendency of being attracted to the verb, and that can happen several times.
Yes, but at the same time, the source material still remains.
The source material na remains as an
and
a
also
separate
and so you can have
preposition.
cycles. It is being integrated into the stem several times, so in different levels.
So what you're saying is that even after an was present in Bantu as a suffix,
Na survived as a preposition, and it could have been
grammaticalized.
integrated
Again
several
and again and
times.
again. So.
That's what I think happened, and I don't know what the source would be, but my impression has always been that pre-final ag has a similar history.
As an.
Yes, that there's something
So-
similar
So it
going
gets
on.
renewed as it
Yes,
becomes a,
yes, yes.
as it acquires, it's paractional or whatever,
Yes.
meaning then the other one, it gets renewed as habitual and perfective, whatever, the pre-final, the real pre-final.
And
That has to do with the inflectional morphology and not with aspect.
and it the details
Not
would
with,
have to be worked out.
directionality.
The details would have to be worked out, but it's also compatible with the fact that these like to combine.
Yeah.
So there must be some extensions that take a prepositional, somehow create verbs that have a prepositional argument, and those are the ones that cluster with the preposition once it gets integrated into the verb.
I think this also relates to these like general question that you asked about whether the Proto-Bantu is agglutinative or isolating. So I don't think it should be either or. So it's probably both to a certain extent for certain things. And also when you do reconstruction, so it's probably so the question that I asked you today after your talk is that some things should be reconstructed as constructions rather than like syntactic constructions, more complex with auxiliaries or with secondary verbs, whatever, or with prepositions, rather than just a succession of suffixes. So that's maybe an improvement on the Mearson's model where you have like succession of only suffixes in Proto-Bantu.
Yeah, but how to decide whether...
There are certain, you can't decide for everything, but for certain things you have you do have indications, like for these ak, for an, for ban, for instance, for these, you do have indications for some things. It's like it's normally in historical linguistics that you don't find evidence for everything, you find evidence for something.
No, but like for what Mark proposed for the cyclic reintegration of na into the stem, I don't know whether in present day Bantu you do have evidence of intermediate stages of na as a preposition, like integrating in a verb already extended with an. I have never seen that, so I mean that's a nice, or as na, or reintegrated in already extended verbs in present day Bantu. If you still find, I have never seen languages where na has this intermediate status between an extension and a preposition in present day Bantu languages. I don't know, it might exist, but if what you say, it doesn't seem implausible, but it would be nice to have some evidence showing those intermediate stages between.
Well, at least from a prosodic point of view, you can show that sometimes they're at an intermediate stage. I mean, if doesn't have to respect maximality constraints, then it's something that is half in the template of the verb stem and half outside still.
I think possibly, we don't know the time depth of the maximality constraints very well, so it's not totally implausible that these, I think these suffixes with ahs that look a little bit more like roots could have started to detach as well and sort of dechromatical, right? Especially, I'm thinking now, what's the language where the prefixes got detached from the noun class? Kukuya, where there's really good evidence that the prefixes actually prosodically realigned. Is that a CISO language? Kukuya. So there's these things, that's the example that makes me confused. And that's pretty well documented, right? The prefix is actually detached from
Napoleon's book, where the prefix of a noun phrases with the preceding stem. There's never an interaction phonologically between a prefix and its own stem. It's really very clear that each stem starts a phonological word.
I wouldn't know, I mean, I think, normally I wouldn't think debonding is all that plausible, but in this space I don't know that.
But this is a completely different type of situation. There you have this very strong stem initial prominence that, I mean, that starts the beginning of something of a prosodical unit. And so in that context, it's not abnormal that anything that precedes is being phrased with what.
Oh, there seems to be some evidence for debonding, or whatever term you want to use, in the Northwest, more than, in general, and I don't think it would be totally implausible that some of these, like the on or the og, actually got reanalyzed as separate prosodic words, and they were more integrated. I think this is a good point of Kuhn's, that we don't actually ever see, like, we do see some of the locatives become extension-like, right? Like, say, is it what Kimieni describes for, Rwanda, these locative applicatives, where the mo and the pa.
Well, but they're clitics.
They're clitics, but I mean, we see that, but we don't see it with a convenitive or anything, do we?
Well, the one thing you see is I mentioned Uganda, nga, which is just past habitual and imperative habitual. And I assume it was anga at the end, and somehow it got reanalyzed as plus nga. And so now when it's in one of the tenses, you get a and then nga. The imperative when you have an object prefix. So you get an a final, so it comes out a and ga. So I think that probably is a debonding.
Yeah, but that's it's reanalysis of more complex material. That's the opposite situation of what.
Yeah, no, but I think that's consistent with the bidirectionality of so many of the things we've been discussing yesterday and today. It's not so unnatural to go from A to B or B to A. In both directions, we're building up or breaking down, or that kind of thing. Because certainly, like if you go back to what was discussed in the Northwest and the more analytic type languages, Tom thinks that a lot of them never had the full agglutinative morphology, but there are some of the languages, he admitted at lunch,
I admitted it in the article
that do get breakdown. That also some of the analytic reflexes are the result of going the other direction. So we've got possibly a mixture of languages that never had the morphology and others that had it and lost it.
Yeah, I really agree. I mean, actually, it's in the article. But the thing is, I would still go by typology. What is the more frequent phenomenon? And it's clearly not this debonding, dismantling. And actually, if you look at the pronoun data, you would have to claim that for Niger Congo as a whole. And it's I fully agree. I mean, there are phenomena like that where you, that can happen, but that this explains the history of a family where you have a profile at the root of the tree, like in Zone A. That's my problem, I think.
Can I ask a rather naive question, which is, how far are extensions functional in Bantu languages? I mean, do you have a fixed subset of nouns with a fixed set of extensions, or do people add extensions when they feel like it to verbs, or is it different in different languages? I mean, how much is it a free practice to add extensions as you like?
Well, you need another argument, so we need.
Much more free than rescue. Are you comparing it to, you've been looking at these other, right? Much free.
There's only fixed forms.
Yeah, no, it's very different from
Yeah.
that.
Well, that's right. And is this true for all Bantu languages or some languages?
At least all over the East.
Yeah, in the East then.
But that would be an interesting study. Has anybody looked at natural discourse and actually looked what actually occurs?
Yeah.
And how frequent and what is the ratio between one suffix, two suffix, three suffix forms? I mean, this is something that should be done. Not just looking at a,
Maybe we should get Mina to do it for you, so
Actually,
okay.
I have done one for Northern Sotho 15 years ago, but I should dig it out if you're really interested. I have statistics based on a 4 million word corpus, so running text.
Yeah, and this possibly looking through the family, doing this with 20 languages, representing. No, I mean, there is.
We can start.
Nice job.
We can start with one.
No, there's clearly differences. I mean, that, and you could tell he's working on different languages, but even between different speakers, if you're eliciting, that some accept particularly combinations more readily than others. I was going to say, Joseph, he's here, looked at this very carefully in Rojambo, and just, and it's could be very lexical. In some verbs it sounds better than with other verbs. It's like everything else. And the examples that have been cited in Armindo Lunga's book on Chiao, he's got a verb that he extends by, 12 extensions. But he was very cooperative.
But that's not natural data. Huh?
Right.
So the expression is grammatical.
No, but we recognize the logic of it. See, that's the difference of what we're talking about. That's not what Tom was asking for. But the logic of it was that you can't at some point stop and say, no, that's ungrammatical. It gets very heavy, and at that point say, nobody's ever going to say that. We're not going to find that in the corpus. And I know when I've sent some forms to Mina, and she looks in her corpus, she says, was that the 4 million word one? Says, I've got 2 examples, of that, or something like that. So you just don't expect it very much at all, but there's nothing, we're thinking of these things as a grammar. So, but they're not ungrammatical to do that. It's just that they're just, you just wouldn't do that if you were speaking naturally. Yeah. It's like doing syntax.
So one of the questions that came up during discussions also last week earlier on in our team is that when the carved order, I think Jeff claims it in one of his papers, or one of the 2005 papers, that this reflects the chronology of grammaticalization. So does it?
I don't know if I would say that. I mean, yeah, there are things, there are things you're more committed to years later and things. But yeah, I did say that because it made the paper seem nicer.
But
It
because
is a question, it's a
it
serious
ties in with the discussion on how old or what the time depth of prefix stacking is, how many, if the possibility to stack several prefixes one after the other is something that goes back to Proto-Bantu or is a later innovation. So I don't, but why wouldn't you know?
Oh no, I don't. Well, I think I looking partly seeing the talks today and looking for source verbs and actually citing some of Givon's work. I would be much more hesitant to do that today than I was then. I'm just more skeptical about the time depth and even trying to find lexical sources. I'm not telling other people not to do it. I just am more skeptical that we'll get anywhere that way. The stacking is an interesting question. I mean, I think there was some. I don't know how much we can reconstruct, but clearly these Yao examples are not, well, sometimes there's innovative, that Yao has the Asia, right?
Oh, yeah, it is.
There are innovative extensions that do things.
Yeah.
But even in that one paper, I convinced myself that was it OSA actually, I think some of the languages in the South or the East may have freed up some earlier constraints. So my guess is the original is not as extreme as Northwest, but somewhere in between Northwest and these really long ones. Whether we can read the chronology, it's not unreasonable, but I think I would treat that more cautiously now because I see how many kinds of internal reanalyses can happen of the stem after it's already fixed. And then I think about the time depth and I'm wondering how simplistically we should look at linearization in such a fixed system, right? Like a lot of things could have happened. So I don't want to say it's wrong, but I think I'd be more cautious now, just having seen more things that can happen,
Well, it should follow that the ones that were there the longest should be closer, as you said, but also they should be the ones that we find all over Niger-Congo. And so if you take the East, which is the first one in the template, I was kind of concerned that More has S as its last suffix. So, and of course that kind of makes sense if you think about what a causative is. Cause a whole clause, right? So everything in there could be another thing. So these things, there would have to have been some reordering somewhere to get that difference, because they're cognate, presumably, the S causative in More in Gur, a Gur language, and the S causative in the East in Bantu.
I think what I would worry about now with the time depth, the more transparent an extension is semantically, it could be old, but it could maintain its transparency semantically and phonologically, the more likely I could imagine it getting just reapplied on the outer edge of a stem because it's so easily analyzable, just through analogical change. That's the problem. How do we prevent analogical extension from taking an inner suffix and then allowing it to get on the outer? I don't think I thought about that hard enough in 2005.
Okay. Then there is the issue of both Roseanne and Sarah were looking for Bantu internal evidence to propose etymology for the U suffix, the passive suffix, and for it related to the verb git. So the question is, is that methodologically speaking, does it make sense to look for Bantu internal lexical evidence as, so what this would, then we would implicitly assume that the grammaticalization happens at some stage after Proto-Bantu, or if we assume that it's earlier, should we look for Bantu external evidence to find the lexical sources for these topics? So I don't know whether there are any opinions or views or
My go-to solution would be to look first into grass fields and other close languages before you look for these complicated and contorted etymologies. And if it's more likely they're inherited, but, you know, we don't know. But I would look harder at grassfield evidence first, myself.
So I have an opinion. I mean, when you speak about grammaticalization, so you mix two things. I mean, there is morphologization when things become morphemes, and there is, if you have a construction which has a certain function, it is also a certain constructionalization. So if you imagine at the Proto-Bantu level you already had a construction with auxiliary verb which expressed a certain function, it was already a Proto-Bantu construction with this particular function. But the morphologization becoming of this element, the suffix, may have happened later at the lower levels. So these are two different things that need to be kept apart. And, yeah.
So at which point did the sort of hypoanalysis occur, that the meaning that was expressed by the whole construction became attached to one particular morpheme?
No, the meaning is still expressed by the whole construction. The construction is still there. It's just the morphological status of the elements changed, so they became bonded. Before they were a bit more independent. Now they're all bonded in one, let's say, prosodic word, morphological word, whatever. So the meaning is there, the construction is there, just the morphological status of the elements changed. That's it.
So saying this, you would say you can look for lexical
Yes, yes, why not? And for instance, I mean, I discussed it with Sarah about this applicative it. So we can actually propose an etymology if you split the two, so you have three types, A, B, and C. So A and B, the locative, and the other one was focus. So it's one type, and the C perfective another. So in the A and B, they can be proposed the source, the copula, or the locative verb did to be. Simply, then you have a construction like he killed the goat, it is at the market, or something like that. So and then we have morphologization at the later stage, and it would get attracted to the stem and so on, so that happens. And the other construction would be this effective construction, for which the plausible source would be the verb that Sarah proposed, is git, if you translate it like accomplish or something, which would be quite a natural source of the effective marker. Do for do also you can get iterative or whatever, so it's also possible.
So and similar applicative extensions in Atlantic and then
I don't know. And also this is another question also, because when Larry said, so you have these Mori have S causative and you have Bantu S East causative, which are clearly cognate. They may be cognate, but the question is, how are they cognate? Are they cognate as Indo-European gender markers or case markers, in the sense that they all come from the same gender markers or the same case markers, or are they cognate like Romance articles, because they all come from the same source, the word for one? So
You mean they would have been independently created? Is that what
yes,
you
I
mean?
mean, if they all met from the same source, if the original source was something like cause, and then you create causative, you can create causative several times on several occasions in several areas, because that's the natural.
Cause it comes
Yeah.
from south.
Yeah, so that's the natural.
But in the Niger Congo, I don't know a verb that will work.
That's the natural way of, just the natural pool, if all the languages are related, so they have a certain, if they're related, so they have a certain pool of elements from which they draw to create these different constructions, express the different meanings, and this pool is similar in all these languages because they're related. But this does mean, and so this may also explain why in Mori S is the last one, whereas in Bantu it's the first one, because they just, they happened at different occasions, so they all of them were morphologized independently.
Yeah.
And that's
One of the, even if there are plausible lexical items, but then even to bringing up the other side of this is the plausible constructional source. So one of the other reasons why I was skeptical about this approach is I don't know what the plausible constructional source is for a post-verbal. Maybe I just don't know it. I mean, I'm not like for a post-verbal B, like these elements in
The
Bantu.
negative markers?
What, sorry?
Negative markers?
No, but what is the plausible, yeah, you think of, I mean, in order to grammaticalize the applicative or whatever, or even the perfective, what is the source construction at the stage, the relevant stage of Bantu that would put this right after the verb so that they would fuse together? I just don't know what that,
I mean, the different scenarios they can think of. I mean, first it depends, I mean, which constructions were frequent. So it may happen so that this oblique argument was, I mean, the oblique, no, these two verb constructions, but the second verb was be, was frequently after the verb rather later.
What is that in like current Bantu? So I think one of the things that they had turned to was Gavon's, I think, useless idea that we're talking about of the old SOV order, right? They were just that's at a time depth, it's speculation, there's nothing to do with it. So what is the VB construction, the source one? I'd like to see that in some Grassfield language somewhere.
Well, if you go just outside Bantu, I mean, like which is not narrow Bantu, but even if you go like in southeastern Nigeria, I mean eastern Nigeria, like all these small languages there. If you go to Idoid or whatever, so languages. I mean,
yeah, it's a little far from me, I guess. When I'm talking about
I'm not sure where where the distinction is between what is Bantuic and what is not Bantu.
Yeah.
It's kind of also fuzzy. It's
No, I
not
know.
very clear. There are no clear demarcation between them.
Yeah, well, I know. That would be the challenge, I'd say, for anyone to propose the etymological source is also to propose the precise syntactico-constructional source. And I'm not saying it can't be done, just that fits within the overall picture. So if you want to do that, then the SOV story is not.
And also,
When we talk about it, I mean, there are several cases in that area which have root serialization. And Igbo actually grammaticalized it to an extent that.
Well, that's okay, and that's
and you think, oh, these are old suffixes, and of course they are not in Igbo.
Yeah.
But and so.
Well, no, that's it. I'm saying it's the analytical challenge. I'm not saying it can't be done. I'm just saying that to find a lexical item that you think is a plausible lexical source, that also, and the root serialization is
it's not always possible.
Yeah. Yeah, but the root serialization we talked about is the most plausible, or and the VVVV serialization, which you do find close enough, but I don't think we know its distribution well enough to know.
It had to be a long time ago.
I know, that's it doesn't.
We're speaking about Proto-Bantu which is a long time ago. So
Yeah. Yeah.
when they all were closely together.
Yeah, and I think addressing Koen's question, it's not going to be very likely that we'll find the lexical source in present Bantu languages, with any certainty anyway.
We may
Yeah, I mean, of course we don't love it, but if we felt we could believe it and feel comfortable. But,
Okay, are there any more naive questions? This is kind of not a dialogue, but a quintalogue or something. Is there? That's not a problem. That's very welcome. But maybe some people feel too shy or too. Yeah, Tara, the two of you.
I have a naive question about what Sebastian was saying about this problem of noun class resolution with the suffix. I guess it's a two-part question. And one is how frequent would that need actually have been, given that it's usually two people, or is that wrong, that it's not usually two people involved in this construction? I mean, is there? It seems at least like it would have gone back to doing it with two people. And somewhat relatedly, I'm wondering. I know that at least in a non-negligible number of languages, it's common for at least this construction that they are doing, we are doing it with so and so, meaning I and that person doing it together. And is there anything how far back can we get this sort of pragmatic lightness strategy kind of thing? And if we can find evidence one way or the other, does that tell us anything about the origin or anything else? Those are my naive questions.
Great. Any answers, Sebastian?
No, that was the main purpose of my presentation, is that we find these structures synchronically throughout Bantu, and I definitely have no idea to what stage which construction can be reconstructed. And I think looking also at the methodological discussion that we had yesterday, do we go for this kind of numerical? We need to have as much languages as possible to see to which stage we can reconstruct it, or do we just need a few representative languages as a sample, and if they occur in there, then it's okay to reconstruct it too. But I was just throwing pebbles in the pond, like, we see this in current day Bantu, and yeah. So, but I think your first question is a very good observation, but I mean, still in many stories you can have like animals maybe doing stuff together or to each other, and these animals might have belonged to different noun classes, and I don't think there was no gender conflict at all in Proto-Bantu. Probably in some way you could use nouns from two different classes, and then how did they resolve it? I have no idea.
The pots were stacked on each other. Like with, there are Proto-Bantu words for pots. But that would be changing. Other questions, observations?
Can I just commend Degema to everybody? I mean, Degema is the language with the long, complicated verbal extensions, which are quite unlike any other branch of Enoid, for reasons that are not at all clear. And I've never systematically compared them with Bantu or anything like it, but somebody should, because it's sitting there in southern Nigeria, waiting for somebody to say, how did this language get there? Why has it got all these extensions, and where do they come from? It's completely exceptional in the whole area.
Any PhD students in the room?
There's a reflexive, yes, yeah, Nick Rolla and I worked a lot on it. There's the causative, a reflexive, a reciprocal, and an iterative. The causative looks like ise, the reflexive looks like na, or ane. The reciprocal looks like angine, that's nice, right? And then there's an iterative that has a different form of iri, I-R-I-Y. And there's wonderful morphophonemics. Lots of harmony and deletions and various things, but you can get some combinations. So yeah, it's been, I mean, Ethelbert Kari has done a lot of work on it, and in his dictionary we went through and took out every extension we could find.
And
Tom?
what is interesting in Degema, it's not carp at all, but in a totally different template, right? So the causative is late, and the reciprocal is the first. So, and then I think these are arguments actually to say even the extensions were not as fixed in early Niger-Congo, that there was more variation, and carp is a Bantu specific, or possibly even, Bantu somewhere in the family tree.
Causative is first.
Well,
Oh, sorry, here is
the
causative.
causative is after the reciprocal, reflexive, benefic correction.
I've got it in both orders. Causative, reflexive, iterative. Causative, reciprocal, iterative. Reflexive, causative, iterative. And reciprocal, causative, iterative. So there's both, there's lots of orders.
So who is right?
Yeah.
Leaveson? Other, maybe I see a lot of people who are very excited to get to the Proto-Bantu quiz, so maybe let's have a break of 5 minutes. We will show the teams once again. I would propose the teams join together.